"You two are in the wrong cabin." The woman's voice cut through the first-class cabin like a blade. "I don't care what your little phones say. These seats aren't meant for people who look like they wandered in by mistake." Vivian Ashcroft, 52, white, ultra-wealthy corporate power broker, immaculate designer suit, diamond watch, reputation for ruthless influence. She stood in the aisle, elegant and immovable, a silk scarf draped like a sash of authority. Her eyes dragged over Daniel Carter, 38, dark-skinned black man, logistics manager, disciplined and measured, raised to believe dignity speaks louder than anger, and his wife, Naomi Carter, 35, medium brown skin, healthcare administrator, composed, perceptive, fiercely loyal. This flight was their first-class experience, earned, planned, cherished with open disdain. Daniel rose slowly. "Ma'am, these are our seats." She laughed, sharp, humorless. "Oh, please. I've funded wings on this commercial. Airline, I practically own the air you're breathing up here." Passengers turned. The cabin went tight. Daniel's wife stood beside him, shoulders squared. "We paid for first class. This is our anniversary." "Anniversary?" the woman echoed mockingly. "How adorable. Pretending. Do you know how many people like you try this every week? Buy something they can't maintain, then act offended when reality taps them out." A flight attendant froze nearby, tablet clutched to her chest. Vivian flicked her wrist. "Sweetheart," she said to the attendant, "fix this. I don't want a scene." Daniel held out his boarding pass. "Here, seat numbers, our names." Vivian barely glanced. "Paper doesn't matter. Airline policy matters. And policy prioritizes loyal passengers, real ones." Naomi's voice cut in, controlled but shaking. "You don't get to decide who belongs here." Vivian turned to her slowly, smiling like a predator. "Oh, I already did. People who belong don't have to explain themselves." The attendant's tablet chimed. Vivian leaned in, eyes flashing. "There it is. See? System correction." Daniel stared. Their seats now displayed occupied. Ashcroft V. "That just changed," Daniel said. "That's not possible." Vivian shrugged. "Technology is funny, especially when it meets questionable bookings." "Questionable?" Naomi snapped. "Are you accusing us of fraud?" Vivian sighed theatrically. "I'm saying, when people stretch beyond their station, systems snap them back." A supervisor appeared, flanked by security. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, already avoiding Daniel's eyes. Vivian gestured lazily. "They're confused about their seating." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're not confused. Our passenger rights—" The supervisor cut him off. "Sir, please lower your voice." "I'm calm," Daniel said. "I'm being erased." Security stepped closer, to him. Naomi whispered, "Daniel." Vivian leaned forward, voice dripping sarcasm. "See? Always the same. Loud when things don't go their way. It's exhausting." Passengers stared. Phones rose. The supervisor nodded to security. "We'll relocate you." "Relocate?" Naomi said. "You're punishing us." Vivian smiled, settling into their seats as security guided the Carters past. Think of it as a learning experience. Not every door is meant to open for everyone. As they were separated down the aisle, Naomi one way, Daniel another, the humiliation burned deeper than anger. Then Daniel felt something steadier rise. A verse surfaced from memory, uninvited but unwavering. "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-discipline." 2 Timothy 1-7. He looked back once. Vivian reclined fully, champagne in hand, victorious. She believed this would end here. She was wrong. If you have ever been humiliated, dismissed, or stripped of dignity in a place you earned, then what happens next with Daniel and Naomi will make you angry and hopeful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices to follow the truth. But the real betrayal doesn't happen in the air. It happens after the plane lands. The humiliation didn't end when the plane touched down. It followed them off the aircraft, clung to them through the terminal, and hardened into something colder once they were alone. Daniel waited at baggage claim, jaw locked, replaying the moment their names vanished from the screen. Naomi stood beside him, silent, her arms crossed tightly, not defensive, but holding herself together. "Don't say it," she said softly. "I wasn't going to," Daniel replied, but the truth pressed anyway. Within an hour, Daniel's phone buzzed, an email from the commercial airline. "We regret any misunderstanding. Our records indicate a seatings. Discrepancy resolved according to airline policy. No apology, no acknowledgement of the insult, no mention of being escorted like criminals." Naomi opened her own email, same template, same language, same erasure. "They rewrote it already," she said, like it never happened. At home, the television flickered on. A travel segment played in the background, VIP loyalty benefits explained. Naomi froze. On screen, a blurred image from the flight. Daniel's silhouette. The caption read, "Passenger dispute causes delay." "They leaked it," Daniel said quietly. Social media moved faster than truth. Comments piled up, speculation, mockery, familiar coded language about attitude and knowing your place. Their names weren't mentioned, but the implication was clear. The airline's version had been planted. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling. "Look at this," she said, voice tight. "Every reply from customer service is identical. They closed the case within minutes." Daniel rubbed his temples. "They're protecting her." "Not just her," Naomi said. "The system." That night, sleep wouldn't come. Naomi lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Vivian's smile, the certainty in it. "She knew," Naomi whispered. "She knew they'd back her." Daniel turned toward her. "I should have fought harder." Naomi shook her head. "You did what you were taught to do. Stay calm. Be reasonable. They used that against us." The next morning, a knock came at the door. A woman stood there, mid-30s, nervous, airline badge half hidden under her coat. She glanced down the hallway before speaking. "I was on your flight," she said. "I shouldn't be here, but I can't pretend I didn't see what happened." Daniel stepped aside. Inside, she introduced herself quietly. "I'm Lena, cabin crew." Naomi leaned forward. "They changed the screen." Lena nodded. "Manually. That doesn't happen unless a supervisor authorizes it." Daniel's pulse quickened. "So, it wasn't a glitch?" "No," Lena said. "And it wasn't the first time." She hesitated, then added, "Certain passengers get overrides, especially donors, executives, people connected." Naomi's eyes sharpened, like Vivian Ashcroft. Lena went pale. "You know her name?" "She made sure we did," Naomi replied. Lena swallowed. "There are files, seat logs, incident reports, but they disappear fast. Anyone who complains gets labeled disruptive." "That label follows you," Daniel exhaled slowly. "So we're marked." "Yes." Silence filled the room. Then Lena slid a folded paper across the table. A handwritten time, flight number, and a supervisor's initials. "I can't do more," she said, "but you didn't imagine it. And you weren't wrong." When she left, the apartment felt heavier, but clearer. Naomi opened her laptop. Again, this time not scrolling aimlessly. "If this has happened before," she said, "there are others." Daniel nodded. "And if they erased us this easily, they've erased worse," Naomi finished. A verse came to Naomi, not loud but steady. "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Galatians 6:9. She looked at Daniel. "I'm not giving up." He met her gaze. "Neither am I." Outside, the airline's stock ticker climbed. Business as usual. Inside, something had shifted. The lie was no longer personal. It was patterned, and patterns could be proven. If you have ever been silenced after speaking the truth, told it was a misunderstanding when you knew it was injustice, then stay with Daniel and Naomi. Like, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices as the truth begins to surface. But one hidden document will prove this wasn't a mistake. It was a design. Naomi didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because patterns don't let go once you see them. By morning, the dining table had become a quiet war room. Her laptop glowed with open tabs, passenger forums, civil aviation complaints, archived news stories that never trended. Daniel moved silently around the room, coffee untouched, watching her mind work. "Look at this," Naomi said, tapping the screen. "Different flights, different years, same language." Daniel leaned in. He read one complaint after another. Seat reassigned, system discrepancy, policy resolution, passenger disruptive. Always the same phrases, always closed within 48 hours. "They're copying and pasting people out of existence," Daniel said. Naomi nodded. "That's not random. That's training." She pulled up a spreadsheet she'd started at 3 a.m., columns labeled flight number, passenger description, outcome. One column stood out in red, passenger race, class. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "That's not coincidence." "No," Naomi said. "That's corporate negligence dressed up as efficiency." The doorbell rang again. This time it was an older man. Gray hair, heavy eyes, posture stiff with restraint. He introduced himself as Mark Ellison, former operations analyst for the airline. Retired early, quietly. "I saw your story starting to circulate," he said, sitting down carefully. "They'll bury it, unless you understand how deep it goes." He opened a flash drive. "Seat overrides are logged," Mark continued. "But there's a second system, internal, unregulated. Executives call it customer hierarchy." Naomi frowned. "That's illegal." Mark met her gaze. "So is deleting safety footage. But they do that too." The files were damning, spreadsheets showing manual seat reallocations, internal emails warning of optics risk when displacing premium donors, a memo referencing predictable friction with certain demographics. Daniel stared at one line until it blurred. "Escalate security early to control narrative." "They planned it," he said. "Before we even argued." Mark nodded. "Once your complaint was filed, your name's triggered a flag. That flag goes straight to legal." Naomi's fingers curled into fists. "So they weren't protecting policy. They were protecting exposure. And donors," Mark added quietly. He pulled up one more file, a list of corporate partners. Near the top, Ashcroft Strategic Holdings. Naomi's breath caught. "Vivian," Mark exhaled. "She's not just a passenger. She's leverage. Her firm funds executive retreats, lobbying arms, board bonuses. When she speaks, people move." Daniel felt the humiliation from the plane shift into something sharper, clarity edged with rage. "She didn't just insult us," Naomi said. "She knew the machine would finish the job." Mark leaned back. "That's why no one ever pushes back. The system is built to exhaust you." Silence fell. Then Naomi spoke, voice steady. "We don't want revenge. We want legal accountability." Mark studied her. "That word scares them more than lawsuits." Daniel nodded slowly. "Because lawsuits can be settled. Accountability sticks." Over the next hours, the investigation deepened. Mark connected them with a civil rights attorney willing to listen. Off the record. Naomi cross-referenced complaints with regulatory gaps. Daniel mapped internal timelines against their flight. The story was no longer their story. It was a structure. And the more they uncovered, the more horrifying it became. Passengers escorted off planes for questioning policy. Complaints routed away from regulators. Legal teams pre-writing public statements before incidents occurred. Employees threatened with termination for documenting truth. "This isn't bias," Naomi said softly. It's architecture. Daniel sat to eat, back, overwhelmed. How do people live with this? Mark answered without hesitation. Because no one ever connects the dots publicly. A quiet knock interrupted them. Lena, the flight attendant, stood there again, eyes rimmed red. They're asking questions at work, she said. About me. About you. Naomi stood. You don't have to stay. I know, Lena said. But I have something. She handed over a printed email thread. Internal. Marked confidential. The subject line made Daniel's stomach drop. Carter Incident. Risk Mitigation. Inside, a supervisor recommending early removal to avoid escalation consistent with prior profiles. Naomi read it twice. They categorized us before we spoke. Lena nodded. I'm scared. But I'm more scared of staying silent. Daniel felt something shift, fear loosening its grip. A verse he'd read earlier echoed now, grounding him. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life. James 1:12. He looked around the table. Naomi, steady and fierce. Mark, tired but resolved. Lena, trembling but brave. This isn't just about us anymore, Daniel said. Naomi met his eyes. No, it's about every person they erased because it was convenient. Mark closed his laptop. If you take this public, they'll retaliate. Naomi didn't hesitate. Then they'll expose themselves. Outside, the airline announced record profits. Inside, the truth had crossed a line. It could no longer be put back. The spark had become a fire. If you've ever discovered the truth was darker than you imagined and still chose to stand, then stay with Daniel and Naomi. Like, subscribe and stay with Dignity Voices as accountability begins. But when the truth threatens power, power strikes back, and the storm is just beginning. The retaliation didn't arrive with sirens or threats. It arrived with silence. Daniel noticed first when his work email refused to load. The screen blinked once, then went blank, replaced by a sterile notice. Access temporarily suspended pending internal review. No explanation, no contact name, just a locked door where routine had been. Naomi felt it hours later, scrolling through her phone while coffee went cold beside her. Overnight, the tone online had shifted. The ridicule was gone. In its place came something colder, measured skepticism, legal language disguised as concern. Anonymous accounts repeated the same phrases with mechanical precision. Context matters. There are two sides, no evidence of wrongdoing. They're shaping the narrative, Naomi said quietly. Before the truth can breathe. Daniel closed the blinds. Outside, life moved on. Traffic lights changing, people laughing on the sidewalk. Inside, the air thickened. Mark arrived without knocking, folder under his arm, face drawn. They activated legal containment, he said. Company-wide directive went out this morning. No internal communication without counsel present. No document retention outside approved channels. Lena texted seconds later. They reassigned me. No cabin duty. No reason given. The storm had begun. Naomi stood at the whiteboard she'd mounted in the living room. What started as a few names had grown into a dense web of arrows and notes. At the center, circled in red, sat Ashcroft Strategic Holdings. Lines extended outward. Executive bonuses, lobbying firms, charitable foundations, political donors. Each connection sharpened the picture. This isn't about one flight, Naomi said. It's about protection, layers of it. Daniel nodded. They don't just move people, they move consequences. A knock interrupted them. A woman in her 40s stepped inside, press badge clipped to her coat. Her eyes scanned the board once, then again. I'm Renee Alvarez, she said. Investigative desk. She didn't ask if they wanted to talk. She already knew. I've been chasing this airline for 2 years, Renee continued. Every time I get close, the story collapses. Sources disappear. Editors get nervous. Legal calls start early. Naomi slid a document across the table. What about this? Renee read in silence. Her jaw tightened. Manual seat overrides. Internal hierarchy tags. This is operational, not anecdotal. And connected, Daniel added. Renee looked up. To Vivian Ashcroft. Yes? Renee exhaled, something like grim satisfaction crossing her face. That explains the pressure. She leaned forward. If we do this, it won't be a single article. It'll be a series. And once it starts, it won't stop. Naomi didn't hesitate. Good. By evening, the pressure sharpened. Daniel's phone rang from an unknown number. He answered on speaker. Mr. Carter? A man's voice said smoothly. This is a courtesy call. You're standing near a very large machine. Machines don't feel bad when people get crushed. Consider stepping back. The line went dead. Naomi stared at the phone. That wasn't a threat, she said. That was a measurement. Mark paced. They want to see if fear fractures you. It didn't. Instead, the work intensified. Renee coordinated with her editor to lock the investigation under embargo, ensuring it couldn't be killed quietly. Mark mapped regulatory violations that bypassed arbitration and forced external review, paths toward accountability that settlements couldn't erase. Naomi reached out discreetly to civil rights advocates, sharing just enough to prepare support without tipping off corporate lawyers. Daniel called his mother. He hadn't planned to. He just needed her voice. She listened without interrupting, then said softly, "Truth has weight, son. Don't carry it alone." That night, doubt crept in anyway. Daniel sat at the table long after the others slept, staring at the board until the lines blurred. What if they ruin us? He asked when Naomi joined him. Jobs, reputation, everything. Naomi sat across from him. They already tried. The difference now is we're not isolated. As if summoned, Lena called, voice shaking. They asked me to sign something, an NDA, retroactive. Mark didn't hesitate. That's intimidation. They said my career would end, Lena whispered. Naomi took the phone. Lena, listen to me. What you did matters. And if they end your career for telling the truth, we will make sure the world knows why. Silence stretched. Then Lena inhaled. Okay, she said. I won't sign. The next morning, the airline released a statement. We take all customer concerns seriously and adhere strictly to airline policy and passenger rights. Renee laughed when she read it. That sentence has buried more scandals than denial ever could. But the statement triggered something the airline didn't expect, a routine regulatory inquiry. On paper, harmless. In reality, dangerous. Requests went out for logs, manifests, internal correspondence. The airline delayed. Renee filed public records requests. Mark flagged inconsistencies. Naomi discovered a missing hour in the CCTV archive from their flight. They scrubbed it, Daniel said. Which means it existed, Naomi replied. Vivian Ashcroft broke her silence that evening at a charity gala. Cameras flashed as she stepped onto the carpet, silver gown shimmering, confidence untouched. When asked about the incident, she smiled thinly. Some people confuse access with entitlement, she said. My company values order. Chaos is bad for business. The clip spread instantly. Naomi watched it twice. She's baiting us. Daniel felt anger rise, then settle into something steadier. She's overconfident. Renee called from her car. We have 2 former employees ready to talk. Off the record. For now, they confirm a pattern. Seat removals, pre-written incident reports, and something else. What? Naomi asked. They call it clean chains, Renee said. A process designed so no single person is accountable. Mark closed his eyes. That's criminal. Yes, Renee replied, and documented. By week's end, the apartment felt like a command center. Phones rang constantly. Laptops glowed late into the night. Fear still appeared, but it no longer controlled the room. Late one night, Daniel stood alone by the window, city lights reflecting in the glass. He whispered a prayer, not for victory, but for steadiness. Naomi joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Whatever happens," she said, "we didn't look away." He nodded. "And once this breaks, neither will they." Somewhere across the city, executives met behind closed doors. Lawyers refined language. Influence tightened its grip. The storm was no longer gathering. It was moving. The collapse arrived without warning, without drama, without mercy. It arrived as procedure. Daniel was halfway to work when his phone rang. The number was blocked. He answered anyway. "Mr. Carter," a woman said, voice smooth, distant, practiced. "This is corporate compliance. You are required to report on site immediately." "For what reason?" Daniel asked. There was a pause, perfectly measured. "Concerns regarding your recent conduct and external activity." The word conduct carried weight. It implied guilt without accusation, punishment without proof. When Daniel arrived, security was already waiting. No raised voices, no explanation. His badge was taken. His access vanished with a soft electronic chime. An HR representative slid a cardboard box across the desk. Inside were fragments of a life that had assumed stability. A framed photo, a notebook, a chipped mug from a company retreat, a stack of reports he would never finish, and a pen engraved with the company slogan about integrity. "You are being placed on administrative leave," she said. "Pending review." "Review of what?" Daniel asked. She folded her hands tightly. "Reputational risk." That was the end of it. No appeal, no warning, no acknowledgement of years of loyalty. By noon, the same blade cut Naomi. Her supervisor summoned her into a glass conference room. A lawyer sat waiting, expression neutral. A packet lay open on the table, heavy with screenshots, timelines, and selective quotes arranged to suggest coordination. Naomi recognized the tactic immediately. Overwhelm first, explain never, exhaust until silence felt reasonable. "You failed to disclose engagement with external media," the lawyer said calmly. "I was not required to," Naomi replied. "Nevertheless," he said, "your actions expose the organization to scrutiny. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending outcome." "Outcome of what?" Naomi asked. The lawyer smiled thinly. "Public sentiment." When Naomi stepped into the parking lot, her hands were shaking. The sun felt too bright. Cars passed. People laughed. The world moved on without noticing what had been taken. At home, Daniel sat on the couch, staring at nothing. "They took it," he said. "They took mine too," Naomi answered. The apartment felt smaller, compressed by fear and uncertainty. The next blow came fast. Renee called, voice tight. "They filed preemptive action, defamation, market interference. They are claiming you fabricated events to manipulate stock value." Naomi laughed once, hollow and sharp. "That is insane." "It does not have to be true," Renee said. "It only has to exhaust you financially and emotionally." Minutes later, Mark arrived, pale, clutching his laptop. "They wiped everything," he said. "Servers, backups, archives, emergency purge under security. Protocol." "That is obstruction," Naomi said. "Yes," Mark replied, "and they are betting you will not survive long enough to prove it." The phone rang again. Lena. "They fired me," she said through tears. "Breach of loyalty." Naomi closed her eyes. "I am so sorry." "They offered me my job back," Lena whispered. "If I signed a statement saying nothing happened, that you misunderstood, that the airline acted properly." Daniel's voice was steady. "And you did not." "No," Lena said. "I could not live with it." When the call ended, silence filled every corner of the room. Daniel stood before the whiteboard. Without documents, the names and arrows looked fragile, almost imaginary. "They are dismantling us," he said. "They are isolating us," Naomi replied. The fear was no longer abstract. It had weight. It sat in their chests and followed them from room to room. At dusk, the warning arrived. A courier left an unmarked envelope at their door. Inside were photographs of Daniel and Naomi entering their building, walking their block, stopping at the corner store, timestamps circled in red ink, surveillance masquerading as coincidence. A single sentence was typed beneath them. This does not end the way you think it does. Naomi dropped the photos. They are watching us. Daniel felt something cold settle into his chest. Not panic, calculation. The realization that intimidation had become personal. That night, Naomi shook uncontrollably. The weight of weeks collapsed into hours, jobs gone, evidence erased, allies silenced, lawsuits looming like shadows with teeth. "What if we stop?" she whispered. "Just stop and protect what is left." Daniel did not answer immediately. The thought had already found him. No income, no safety net. Their names quietly reframed as liabilities, friends pulling away, not from cruelty, but fear of proximity. "Maybe the machine is too big," he said, softly. The words tasted like surrender. Rain began to fall outside, steady and relentless. It blurred the city lights and turned the windows into mirrors. Naomi stood at the glass. "I hate that they made me doubt myself." Daniel joined her. "That is how power works. It convinces you that resistance is selfish." "I don't know how much more I have," she said. "I am tired of being afraid in my own home." They sat in silence, listening to rain and distant sirens, feeling the slow erosion of certainty. Hours passed. Daniel's phone buzzed again. "Walk away now. You will keep your dignity. Continue, and you will lose everything." Daniel stared at the screen, typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Each attempt felt like choosing between safety and self. Naomi watched him. "They are offering silence." "In exchange for survival," Daniel said. They sat together, suspended between fear and resolve, knowing that whatever choice they made would shape the rest of their lives. Then Naomi stood. "No," she said. Daniel looked up. "No," she repeated, steadier now. "They do not get to decide what truth costs." She crossed the room and wiped the whiteboard clean in one brutal sweep. Names vanished, lines disappeared, weeks of work erased in seconds. "Erase everything," she said. "We rebuild from memory." Daniel frowned. "We lost the evidence." "We lost their version," Naomi said. "Not the truth." She opened her laptop, not to recover files, but to reconstruct memory, calls, delays, threats, language patterns, who spoke first, who stayed silent, who benefited. "They rely on fragmentation," she said, "on people only seeing pieces and giving up before they connect." Daniel pulled a chair beside her. "Then we show the whole picture." Outside, the rain softened, but the night remained heavy. Somewhere across the city, executives slept easily, convinced the threat was neutralized, that fear had done its work. They were wrong. This was not the end. This was the breaking point, the moment when everything false burned away and only resolve remained. They did not sleep that night. They made lists instead. What had been lost? What could still be rebuilt? Which risks were real and which were manufactured to paralyze them? Daniel wrote numbers on a notepad, calculating how long they could survive without income. Naomi reviewed contacts, separating those who had gone silent from those who still answered. Fear lingered, but it no longer dominated every thought. It had been named, examined, stripped of mystery. Near dawn, Naomi closed her laptop and looked at Daniel. "They believe we are done," she said. "They think pressure equals obedience." Daniel nodded slowly. "They assume silence means surrender." He stood and looked once more at the empty whiteboard. "They wanted us exhausted." "And they succeeded," Naomi said. "Just not the way they planned." Because exhaustion had removed pretense. There was nothing left to protect except truth itself. The city woke outside. Buses groaned, phones buzzed, Life resumed as if nothing had cracked open. Inside the apartment, something irreversible had occurred. They had crossed the point where retreat felt safer than resistance. Daniel took Naomi's hand. It was still trembling, but it did not pull away. "We move forward," he said. "Carefully, quietly, together." Naomi nodded. "And this time, we do not play defense." They understood now that breaking had been necessary, that the machine only revealed its shape when it crushed you hard enough to leave marks. Those marks would become evidence. This was the night they stopped reacting. This was the moment they began to plan. If you have ever been pushed to the edge for telling the truth, if power tried to erase you quietly, stand with Daniel and Naomi. Like, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices, because what they build next will not just expose a lie. It will dismantle the machine that depends on silence. And what begins in the shadows will soon be forced into daylight, where accountability can no longer hide. Anywhere. If you have ever been pushed to the edge for telling the truth, if power tried to erase you quietly, intimidate you professionally, or break you financially, then stand with Daniel and Naomi. Like, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices, because silence is exactly what injustice depends on. But what they don't realize is that breaking someone down is often how you expose the entire machine. And Daniel and Naomi are about to turn pressure into leverage. Morning arrived without mercy, but it arrived with clarity. Daniel stood in the kitchen staring at the whiteboard Naomi had wiped clean the night before. The absence of names and arrows no longer felt like loss. It felt like intention. If the system survived by fragmenting truth into harmless pieces, then fragments were exactly what they would refuse to offer. Naomi sat at the table with her laptop closed, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. Her face was calm in a way Daniel hadn't seen before. Not peaceful, but resolved. "We stop reacting," she said quietly. "Reaction is how they control the tempo." Daniel nodded. "Then we set it." Mark arrived just after sunrise, carrying nothing but a notebook. No laptop, no files. "They can erase data," he said as he sat. "They can't erase obligations." Lena joined on a secure video call, her face framed by the neutral wall of a borrowed apartment. "I don't have access anymore," she said, "but I still know how decisions travel. Who signs first? Who pretends not to see?" Renee called from her car, parked 2 blocks away. "My editor is nervous," she admitted. "That means the pressure's real." Naomi opened her laptop and typed a single word at the top of a new document. "Sequence. We rebuild the truth in order," she said. "Not from files they owned, but from actions they couldn't undo." Daniel pulled a pen from his pocket. "What happened first?" "The override," Lena said without hesitation. "Manual, supervisor level. That alone violates procedure." "And then?" Daniel asked. "The language," Renee said. "How staff described you changed immediately. Not neutral, pre-framed." Mark leaned forward. "Then the purge. Evidence deletion triggered the moment legal was notified." Daniel drew a line beneath the word on the page. "That's choreography, not coincidence." They worked slowly, deliberately, reconstructing the chain minute by minute. Naomi listed exact phrases spoken by crew members. Mark cross-checked them against training manuals and internal compliance language he still remembered. Lena identified which roles had authority to approve each step. Renee aligned public statements with internal timing gaps. Fear didn't leave the room, but it stopped driving it. "This isn't bias alone," Naomi said. "It's infrastructure." Mark nodded. "They call it a clean chain because every action looks isolated. No single person appears responsible." Daniel tapped the table once. "Then we expose the chain as a single act." The first breakthrough came just after noon. Renee's phone buzzed. She listened, then muted the call, eyes sharp. "A regulator has been tracking complaint suppression across multiple airlines," she said. "They've never had a case that showed intent." Naomi leaned forward. "Until now. They need something unavoidable, Renee continued. Something that bypasses arbitration and forced settlements. Mark's fingers traced lines on his notebook. There's a mandatory disclosure rule, he said. If civil rights risk is identified and concealed, executives become personally liable. Daniel looked up. Not the company? Not the company, Mark confirmed. The people. Silence settled. Not fearful, but focused. Naomi exhaled. That's leverage. They refined the plan with precision. Parallel submissions. Not one complaint, but synchronized filings to civil aviation oversight, labor enforcement, and civil rights review. Each independent, each factual. No speculation, no emotion. Controlled exposure. Renee would notify the airline of imminent publication, not to negotiate, but to trigger mandatory disclosure obligations before release. Witness protection. Lena's testimony submitted under whistleblower statute, activating non-retaliation protocols that the airline could not quietly ignore. And Vivian? Daniel asked. Renee didn't hesitate. Her firm appears in donor influence logs. Regulators won't stop at the airline. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. The weight was still there, but it no longer pressed down. Instead, it anchored her. She whispered, not loudly, not dramatically, but with steadiness. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not give up. The verse didn't change the plan. It steadied the hands carrying it. By evening, the apartment felt transformed. Not safe, but ordered. They reviewed everything again. Dates, jurisdiction, language stripped of anything that could be dismissed as emotion. This has to be boring, Mark said. Boring terrifies them. Renee smiled thinly. Scandal excites. Structure destroys. At 9:26 p.m., Naomi hovered over the send button. This ends deniability, she said. Daniel stood beside her. They ended that when they tried to erase us. She clicked. The first submission went to aviation oversight, the second to labor enforcement, the third to civil rights review, each time-stamped, each logged, each independent. Automated confirmations arrived within minutes. Then the atmosphere shifted. Renee's phone rang again. She listened, then nodded once. They're scrambling, she said. Internal legal just issued a document hold. Lena's screen flickered. I just received a non-retaliation notice, she said. They're required to restore my access for testimony. Mark leaned back slowly. They're moving already. Daniel checked his voicemail. A new message waited. Mr. Carter, the familiar smooth voice said, less confident now, we believe there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps this can be resolved privately. Naomi let out a breath that almost sounded like laughter. That's the sound of leverage. But the night wasn't finished. At 11:41 p.m., Renee's editor called. We're under pressure, he admitted. Political, financial. Renee didn't flinch. Do we have protection? Yes, he said. If we publish documents first, no commentary, no framing. Daniel spoke before she could ask. Truth doesn't need comfort. The editor, exhaled. Then we proceed. By midnight, the countdown had begun. Across the city, executives read alerts they didn't yet understand. Lawyers called donors, donors called favors. Favors went unanswered. Vivian Ashcroft received a message during a private dinner. She read it once, then again. Her smile tightened, not gone, but strained. Back in the apartment, Daniel and Naomi sat side by side, exhaustion heavy but resolve intact. We did this quietly, Naomi said. Yes, Daniel replied. That's why it will land loudly. They didn't celebrate. They didn't relax. They waited. Because once the machine realized it was cornered, it would thrash. And the next moment, public, irreversible, would determine whether truth could finally stand in the open. The reckoning did not arrive with chaos. It arrived with paper. At 8:42 a.m., the first regulatory notice was released. Dry language, neutral tone, devastating reach. It cited procedural irregularities, documentation gaps, and non-compliance with mandatory disclosure obligations. No names yet, no accusations, just enough to make every executive reading it sit straighter. At 8:59, a second notice followed, this one invoking civil oversight jurisdiction and potential discriminatory enforcement. At 9:11, a labor bulletin confirmed whistleblower protections were active, retroactive, and enforceable. By the time the airline's executive board assembled for its emergency meeting, the building was already surrounded by cameras. Daniel and Naomi watched from their apartment, laptops open, phones vibrating steadily on the table between them. They didn't speak. Every alert confirmed what they already felt in their bones. The clean chain had snapped. At 9:38, Renee's investigation went live. There was no headline, no dramatic introduction, just a repository. Time-stamped documents appeared in deliberate sequence, seating logs before and after the override internal policy manuals highlighted line by line, archived emails recovered through third-party servers, audio transcripts synced to boarding times. Nothing accused, everything demonstrated. Within minutes, legal analysts on multiple networks began calling it systemic. Within 10, airline executives stopped answering calls. At 10:14, the airline released a statement. We strongly dispute the characterization of events and are conducting an internal review. The statement barely registered. At 10:27, the stock ticker dipped. At 10:41, a press conference was announced. They're trying to regain control, Daniel said quietly. Naomi shook her head. They're trying to look cooperative. They arrived at the conference center separately, escorted not as plaintiffs or defendants, but as witnesses. Cameras snapped as they entered. Daniel felt Naomi's hand brush his, steady, grounding. Inside, executives lined up behind a podium polished to a mirror sheen. Lawyers flanked them on both sides, hands folded, eyes alert. The room felt staged, rehearsed, insulated from consequence. Vivienne Ashcroft sat in the front row. She wore black, tailored, immaculate, deliberate, the kind of composure that assumed gravity would eventually bend back in her favor. The CEO stepped forward. We regret any misunderstanding, he said. Our airline remains committed to fairness, transparency, and passenger rights. A reporter stood immediately. Why were seating manifests manually altered after boarding was complete? The CEO blinked once. We are still reviewing. Another voice cut in. Why were internal communications deleted after a formal complaint was filed? A third followed. Why was a flight attendant terminated within 48 hours of reporting the incident? The room tightened. The CEO stepped back. Legal counsel approached the microphone. We cannot comment on personnel matters, the lawyer said, but we categorically deny. Renee stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't editorialize. She simply read. I'm going to quote from an internal email, she said. Timestamped 12 minutes before the aircraft landed. Silence spread. She read the line describing early security involvement and narrative control consistent with prior profiles. A murmur rippled through the room. Renee clicked the remote. The screen behind the podium changed. A donor ledger appeared, highlighted in yellow. Ashcroft Strategic Holdings. Multiple entries, annual contributions tied directly to executive incentives. A reporter turned toward Vivienne. Ms. Ashcroft, are you denying your firm's influence over airline policy? Vivienne smiled thinly. I support many organizations. I don't manage their operations. Renee clicked again. The room filled with audio. Vivienne's voice, light, dismissive, unmistakable, echoed across the speakers. They never fight back, the recording said. That's why it works. The silence that followed felt physical. Vivienne's smile vanished. That recording is manipulated, she snapped. A reporter shouted. Is that your voice? Vivienne stood abruptly. This is a coordinated smear. A federal representative stepped forward, badge visible. Based on the documentation presented, he said, we are initiating formal enforcement proceedings effective immediately. The word immediately landed like a gavel. Gasps erupted. Cameras swung. The CEO stepped away from the podium. Legal counsel retreated. Vivian sat down slowly, composure cracking for the first time. Outside, crowds gathered. Former employees, advocacy groups, passengers holding printed screenshots. People who recognized their own erased experiences in the evidence now projected on screens. Inside, the CEO resigned on camera. Another executive followed, then another. Daniel and Naomi were escorted to a side room. A junior official offered water, hands trembling slightly. "You are not required to speak," he said. Naomi nodded. "We're not here to perform." Minutes later, Daniel was asked one question on record. "Why didn't you settle quietly?" He looked straight ahead. Cameras waited. "Because silence was the system," he said. "And silence protects power, not people." He said nothing more. Vivian was escorted out through a side entrance. No cameras, no statement, just absence where certainty once lived. As the conference dissolved into controlled chaos, Renee approached Daniel and Naomi. "You could have destroyed her personally," she said quietly. Naomi met her eyes. This was never about revenge. Outside, chants rose, not angry, but resolute. Accountability, truth, no more clean chains. Daniel stepped into the sunlight, blinking against it. The air felt different. Not lighter, but honest. Naomi exhaled slowly. "They hurt us." "Yes," Daniel said. "And they couldn't unhear it." Behind them, investigations branched outward. Names were added. Systems once invisible were forced into light. They were never designed to survive. The machine was no longer abstract. It was exposed. And exposure, Daniel understood now, was the one place power could not hide. The silence that followed the reckoning was unfamiliar. Not the suffocating silence of the first-class cabin. Not the threatening silence of blocked numbers and sealed emails. This was the silence of aftermath. The quiet that comes when power steps back and consequence steps forward. Daniel and Naomi sat together on their couch, the television muted, headlines scrolling like distant aftershocks across the screen. Airline finalizes settlement agreement with federal authorities. Multiple executives step down amid oversight review. Industry faces new demands for brand accountability. They watched without speaking. For weeks, their lives had been filled with urgency, calls, documents, strategy, fear sharpened into resolve. Now the urgency drained away, leaving something heavier but steadier behind. The official announcement arrived later that evening. A carefully worded statement from the airline acknowledged systemic failures and harm caused to passengers through inadequate enforcement of policy. Lawyers had polished every sentence, but the meaning was unmistakable. This was no quiet dismissal. This was consequence. An executive apology followed the next morning. The former CEO appeared on screen, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed slightly above the camera. He spoke of regret, of responsibility, of lessons learned. He named failures in oversight and admitted that internal processes had prioritized loyalty and image over fairness. Naomi watched once, then turned the screen off. "It's not personal," she said. "No," Daniel agreed. "It's accountability." And accountability, they had learned, was never emotional. It was structural. Over the next few days, the fallout spread outward. The airline's reputation management teams worked relentlessly, rolling out transparency dashboards, reform pledges, and public commitments to independent audits. Other airlines quietly updated policies, hoping distance might protect them from the same scrutiny. Industry panels debated reform. Advocacy groups pushed for permanent oversight. But the most meaningful changes didn't make headlines. They arrived quietly. A message from a flight attendant in another city. "This happened to me years ago. I never spoke up. Thank you for doing what I couldn't." An email from a retired couple. "We were removed from our seats in 2011. No one listened. Now someone finally is." Even Lena stopped by one afternoon, no longer wearing an airline badge. They reinstated me under whistleblower protection, she said, placing a folded document on the table. A revised internal policy, plain language, mandatory reporting, third-party review. It won't fix everything, Lena added, but it changes the rules. After she left, Daniel stared at the document for a long moment. They're responding, he said. Naomi nodded. Because they can't pretend anymore. The settlement agreement was finalized at the end of the week. No courtroom spectacle, no victory speech, just pages of obligations, regulatory oversight, compensation funds, compliance audits, and independent review boards. Daniel read the final page twice. This doesn't feel like winning, he said. Naomi leaned back, exhaling slowly. Justice isn't fireworks. It's foundations. That night, they sat together on the balcony, city lights blinking below. For the first time since the flight, Daniel felt the tension leave his chest. I keep thinking about that moment, he said, when she told us we didn't belong. Naomi rested her head against his shoulder. She didn't decide that. No, Daniel said. The system did, until it didn't. He hesitated. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd settled quietly? Naomi didn't hesitate. We would have been safe, and the next couple would have been erased. A verse came to her, not as something memorized, but as something lived. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. Isaiah 1:17. Daniel smiled faintly. It never promises comfort. No, Naomi said, it promises purpose. Life resumed slowly. Daniel found work again. Less prestigious, more honest. Naomi returned to her office, no longer shrinking her voice. They didn't become public figures. They didn't want to. Their victory wasn't visibility. It was dignity. One afternoon, months later, they walked through an airport concourse together. A billboard advertised luxury travel, sleek images, polished smiles, first class framed as arrival. Daniel stopped. Naomi waited. It used to mean something else, he said. Naomi smiled gently. Now it's just a seat. They kept walking, because dignity, they had learned, isn't about access or upgrades. It's about truth standing where silence once ruled. It's about refusing to disappear when disappearing is the easiest option. And somewhere behind them, far from the terminal and the cameras, a system had been forced to change, not because it wanted to, but because ordinary people refused to look away. If you've ever been told, directly or quietly, that you didn't belong, if power tried to erase you and failed, then remember this story. Stand with truth, walk with dignity, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices, where justice, faith, and humanity meet. This story isn't about an airline. It's about the quiet courage required to say no when silence feels safer. God's word doesn't promise that standing for truth will be easy. It promises that it will be worth it. And sometimes dignity is restored not by winning loudly, but by refusing to disappear.